David, a Marine veteran who lost a leg in Afghanistan, is battling excruciating phantom pain, compelling his devoted wife, Emily, to rush him to Lincoln County Medical Center. At the ER, a bitter security guard, Officer Kraton, obstructs them over a parking spot, callously dismissing David's severe condition and service. Emily, David's steadfast protector, bravely confronts Kraton, refusing to yield to his escalating authority. But in a shocking moment, Kraton deploys his taser, sending Emily convulsing to the pavement. What will David do when his anchor collapses before his eyes? If David and Emily's incredible display of strength resonated with you, consider supporting organizations that provide real assistance to veteran families and caregivers. Like this video and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that highlight quiet courage and unwavering dignity, reminding us to listen closer and see what often goes unnoticed. The security guard's finger lingered on the trigger, his eyes cold and unyielding. "Step back now," he barked. Emily's hands trembled as she raised them, her voice quivering with desperation. "Please, we're only here for help." But the guard's face remained stone, no trace of compassion. The taser sparked to life, a sharp crackle splitting the air. In that fleeting moment, time froze. David, a Marine veteran who'd lost his left leg, crumpled to the ER pavement, his body heavy and helpless. Beside him, Emily convulsed, her frame shuddering against the cold ground. David couldn't lift her, couldn't shield her, couldn't even stand, but his voice, steady as forged steel, cut through the chaos. "I'm sorry, sir, but you've made a grave mistake." Those 6 words echoed, halting the hospital's frantic pulse. They ignited a chain reaction, a full investigation that would ripple far beyond those walls, reminding a nation what resilience and courage truly meant. David Mallister never wore his struggles like a badge. Growing up in the quiet fields of rural Ohio, he learned early that pain was a silent burden, carried with grit and grace. At 12, when his father vanished without a word, David's childhood ended. His younger siblings, Rachel and Danny, just 6 and 4, looked to him with wide, trusting eyes. Overnight, he became the anchor of their small, fractured family. He mastered simple recipes, burnt toast at first, then scrambled eggs, packed school lunches, and took on odd jobs after class, mowing lawns or shoveling snow. His mother, a waitress with fire in her spirit but aching knees from arthritis, poured everything into keeping them afloat. Yet it was David who stitched their lives together, holding tight to the threads of their fragile home. The Marines weren't just a path for David, they were a promise to give Rachel and Danny a chance at something better. At 19, he enlisted, and by 24, he was leading a squad in Afghanistan. His mind was sharp, his calm unshakable, and his natural leadership earned quiet respect from those around him. But on his 3rd tour, just 3 weeks shy of coming home, a roadside IED shattered his world. The blast stole his left leg below the knee, leaving him unconscious in a haze of dust, blood, and deafening silence. He awoke 2 days later in a field hospital, his leg gone, and with it, the man he once knew himself to be. What followed was 14 months of grueling surgeries, relentless rehab, and a pain no one could prepare him for. Phantom pain, they called it. A cruel ghost that burned and twisted where his leg used to be, haunting him in the dead of night when all he wanted was a moment's peace. Through those dark days, one person stood unwavering by his side. Emily. Emily Mallister, then Emily Vargas, was a kindergarten teacher whose laughter could light up the coldest room. They met at a 4th of July barbecue 2 weeks before his final deployment. She didn't care for his uniform or his rank. What caught her eye was his quiet kindness, how he knelt to comfort a little boy who'd scraped his knee, speaking softly until the child's tears dried. That understated strength pulled her in. While he was overseas, they exchanged letters, handwritten and raw, no emails or calls, just ink on paper carrying their hopes across continents. When David returned, scarred and incomplete, Emily didn't hesitate. She ran to him in the airport, tears streaming, embracing both the man he was and the wounds he carried. 3 days later, in the chaos of baggage claim, he dropped to his one knee and proposed. They married the following spring. Emily became more than his wife. She became his lifeline. She relocated them near the VA center, diving into research on prosthetics, sitting through endless medical appointments, and managing his medications with a precision that rivaled any nurse. When depression sank its claws into David, when the phantom pain and silent battles grew too heavy, Emily stayed. She sat with him on the bathroom floor during his lowest moments, holding his hand as he wept. She read his journals when words failed him, piecing together the fragments of his thoughts. By day, she taught kindergarten, her smile a gift to children who never knew that each night she went home to care for her husband's wounds, bathing and bandaging the space where his leg once was. 10 years of marriage brought 10 years of trials, yet they chose each other every day. David had lost a leg, but in Emily he found something far greater, a reason to keep standing. The ache was an old enemy to David Mallister, a relentless, phantom pain that clawed at the void where his leg once was. He'd wrestled with it before, through gritted teeth and sleepless nights, learning to endure its cruel persistence. But this time it roared like a wildfire, fierce and unyielding, scorching through nerves that no longer existed. By the third night, sleep had abandoned him entirely, leaving him with barely 2 hours of restless dozing. The pain had evolved from a dull, nagging pulse to a searing inferno, raging without mercy. That morning, Emily, her voice trembling with worry, had pleaded with him to seek help at the hospital. David, stubborn as ever, brushed her off with a familiar wave of his hand, as he had countless times before. "It'll pass," he growled under his breath, his jaw tight as he fumbled through the routine of making breakfast. But midway through spreading butter on a slice of toast, his body betrayed him. His crutches slipped from his grip, clattering to the floor as he collapsed in a heap, the plate shattering into jagged pieces around him. That was the breaking point. Emily didn't give him a chance to protest this time. Her hands, steady despite their faint tremble, lifted him gently from the chaos of the kitchen floor. She guided him to their battered Honda Civic, sliding the passenger seat back as far as it would go to accommodate his missing leg. He wasn't wearing his prosthetic tonight. The pain was too raw, too vicious to tolerate even the lightest touch against his skin. The drive to Lincoln County Medical Center, 15 miles away, felt endless. It was the only ER open late on a Saturday night, and Emily's silence filled the car as she kept her eyes fixed on the road. Every red light stretched into an eternity, each second heavy with unspoken fear. When she stole glances at David, she saw his knuckles white from gripping the door handle, his forehead slick with sweat despite the crisp spring air seeping through the cracked window. Low groans rumbled in his throat, barely suppressed, as he fought to hold himself together. When they finally reached the hospital parking lot, the main entrance loomed like a distant beacon. The lot was a chaotic sea of cars, every space taken, forcing Emily to circle twice before her eyes caught the loading zone, clearly marked for emergency drop-offs only. Rules be damned, David was her priority. She pulled in, killed the engine, and hurried to the passenger side, grabbing his crutches from the back seat. David, stubborn to a fault, tried to wave her away, insisting he could manage alone. But his face, pale and drawn, told a different story. His jaw was locked, his shoulders sagged under the weight of exhaustion, and every movement sent fresh waves of agony rippling through him. He bit down hard, swallowing the urge to cry out. Emily slipped an arm around his waist, her touch gentle but firm. "Just get to the door," she whispered, her voice a lifeline. "I'll move the car after, I promise." David gave a faint nod, letting her guide him across the pavement. Each step on his crutches felt like scaling a cliff, his pride warring with his body's surrender. They didn't notice the security guard at first, didn't see his narrowed eyes or crossed arms as they approached the ER entrance. Their world had narrowed to survival, to dignity, to making it through one more night. Officer Jean Kraton wasn't always so bitter, but life had a way of souring him. At 43, he stood outside the ER in a black windbreaker, the words security emblazoned in bold white letters across his chest. Once he'd worn a soldier's uniform, 8 years in the Army, 2 tours in Iraq, a fact he dropped into conversation whenever he could. But the uniform had been stripped away, not by choice but by circumstance. A back injury, a clash with a commanding officer, a tarnished record that ended his career. What followed was a string of jobs that never matched the weight of his past. Parking enforcement, mall security, overnight warehouse patrols. None carried the authority he craved. The badge he wore now, clipped to his duty belt alongside a taser, was a poor substitute, but it gave him a flicker of control he clung to desperately. His gut strained against the belt, a reminder of years spent settling for less. But tonight he saw a chance to assert himself. He spotted Emily's car the moment it rolled into the loading zone, his eyes narrowing as she helped her husband out, her focus entirely on him. The hospital parking lot buzzed with the chaotic rhythm of arrivals and departures. Cars weaving through tight lanes, people rushing toward the emergency room's glowing entrance. But for Emily, the world had shrunk to the rigid figure of Officer Kraton, his clipboard gripped like a badge of unyielding power. His uniform was pressed to perfection, his face carved with a scowl that seemed to revel in control. Beside her, Emily's car idled in the drop-off zone, its soft hum a quiet counterpoint to the storm brewing. Her husband David leaned heavily on his crutches, each step a grueling effort, his face etched with the kind of pain that went beyond the physical. A pain born from a leg lost years ago in a war zone, a wound that still haunted him. Kraton didn't seem to see the man struggling before him. Rules were his gospel, and enforcing them with a loud, unyielding voice was the only thing that seemed to spark any life in his bitter eyes. He strode toward them, boots striking the pavement with purpose, his pen already scratching out a citation before they had even crossed half the distance from the car. "Ma'am," he snapped, his voice slicing through the morning chill, "this is an active drop-off zone. You got a hospital-issued permit? Or are you just ignoring the sign like it's invisible?" Emily turned, her hand still steadying David's arm, her heart lurching at the sudden confrontation. "I'm helping my husband inside," she said, her tone calm but threaded with resolve. "He's in a lot of pain, and we're just trying to get him to the ER." "That's not an answer," Kraton cut in, stepping closer, his pen hovering like a judge's gavel. "No permit, no parking. Move the car now or you're getting a ticket." David, his breath shallow from the effort of standing, raised a trembling hand. His voice was quiet but steady, carrying the weight of a man who'd seen too much to be rattled by a clipboard. "Sir, I'm a Marine Corps veteran. We're here for emergency care. I just need a moment to get inside." "A moment?" Kraton's tone was sharp, his eyes narrowing as he closed the gap between them. "I've seen your kind before. Everyone thinks they're entitled to a free pass because they served. Newsflash, buddy. Plenty of us did our time. That doesn't make you special." Emily's breath hitched, her eyes blazing with a fury she rarely let surface. "He lost his leg overseas," she said, her voice low but cutting, each word deliberate. "He's in severe pain. All we're asking for is a shred of human decency." "Decency?" Kraton sneered, his voice growing louder as if he wanted the whole parking lot to hear. "You think parking wherever you please, ignoring clear signs, is decent? You're not above the law. Nobody is." David's fingers tightened around the handles of his crutches, his knuckles paling. He wasn't a man who looked for fights. He'd spent years avoiding them, carrying his burdens quietly. But the way Kraton spoke to Emily, the way his eyes flicked to David's prosthetic leg with a look of contempt, as if it were a personal affront, stirred something deep and angry inside him. "I'm not asking for special treatment," David said, his voice even but burning with restrained heat. "I'm just asking you to act like a human being." "Then act like one yourself," Kraton fired back, pointing his pen at David's prosthetic like it was evidence of some crime. "You're not dying, you're just lazy. Move the car or I'll have it towed." The words cut deeper than they had any right to, not because they held any truth, but because they echoed every doubt David had ever wrestled with in the dark hours of his recovery. Emily's hands trembled at her sides, her lips pressed into a tight line of disbelief. "I'll move the car after he's checked in," she said, her voice taut with barely controlled anger. "Not before." Kraton squared his shoulders, his jaw tightening. "Then we've got a problem." To him, they weren't a veteran in agony or a wife fighting for her husband's dignity. They were just two people daring to defy his authority, and Kraton had spent years ensuring people regretted crossing him. Emily had always been the anchor in their marriage. Through 10 years of hospital visits, maddening VA bureaucracy, and the nights when David's pain, physical and otherwise, kept them both awake, she had never once raised her voice in anger. But Kraton's cold, callous dismissal of David's sacrifice, the way he reduced a life-altering injury to a mere inconvenience, shattered her restraint. She stepped forward, positioning herself between the officer and her husband, her shoulders straight, her voice steady but laced with a quiet fury. "Sir, I'm asking you to step back. My husband needs emergency care. We're not here to make trouble." Kraton crossed his arms, a smirk curling one corner of his mouth. "Lady, if he needs help, the ER's right there. Check him in and move the car like everyone else. You're not special." Emily inhaled deeply, her chest burning with a heat she could barely contain. "You keep saying that like needing help is some kind of crime," she said, her voice sharper now, cutting through the hum of the parking lot. "He's a veteran. He served 3 tours. He lost his leg over there." Kraton waved a dismissive hand, as if her words were nothing more than background noise. "Yeah, well, plenty of guys lose things. That doesn't give him a pass to break the rules. You can't just park wherever you want because your husband's got a sob story and a limp." David shifted behind her, his face drained of color, not just from the pain now, but from the shame of being exposed like this. His struggle laid bare for strangers to gawk at. He hated being the center of attention, hated being the reason for a confrontation. But he also knew Emily wasn't going to back down. Not this time. She took another step toward Kraton, her voice rising, steady but fierce. "He's not a sob story. He's a human being who's had to fight for everything. His life, his recovery, his right to stand here. And I'm not moving that car until he's inside and registered." Kraton's hand drifted to his belt, resting near his holstered taser, his eyes narrowing. "Ma'am, you're getting agitated. That's disorderly conduct. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." The parking lot seemed to hold its breath. A couple heading toward the hospital paused, their eyes darting between Emily, David, and the officer, the tension thick enough to choke on. The moment teetered on the edge of something volatile, as if one wrong move could send it spiraling into chaos. David stood frozen at the sidewalk's edge, his crutches biting into his palms as he gripped them tightly. A teenager in a baggy hoodie pulled out his phone, the camera catching the sunlight as he began recording. 2 nurses in worn blue scrubs hesitated near the hospital's sliding glass doors, their steps slowing, their eyes flickering with an unease as they watched the scene unfold. Emily's gaze swept the parking lot, sensing the shift in the air. More eyes turning toward them, more phones raised, the tension thickening like a gathering storm. Officer Kraton's voice cut through, sharp and commanding. "You've got 10 seconds to move your vehicle, or I'm radioing for a tow and citing you both for obstruction." David's chest tightened. He stepped forward, his voice calm but urgent. "Officer, we're not looking for trouble. My wife's just trying to help me. We'll move the car. Just give us a moment." Kraton's lip curled into a sneer, his words dripping with contempt. "Then keep your wife in line, or I'll handle it." That was the spark that ignited Emily. Her voice cracked through the air, fierce and unyielding. "Don't you ever talk to him like that." Would David reach her for his fingers brushing her arm? "Emily, let's just..." But she was already moving, stepping right up to Kraton, her eyes blazing with defiance. "You think you can bully a man who sacrificed his leg for this country? You're standing there with your taser and your badge, but he's standing here with honor. Who do you think people will remember?" Kraton's face darkened, his jaw clenching as the crowd grew. It wasn't a large group, but it was enough to shift the balance. Phones out, whispers spreading like ripples in water. A nurse spoke softly into her walkie-talkie, her voice urgent. A woman in a floral blouse leaned toward her husband, pointing, her words swallowed by the growing murmur of voices across the lot. Kraton, feeling the crowd's attention, didn't back down. Instead, he leaned in, his voice low and threatening. "Last warning. Step back or you're finished." Emily didn't flinch. "No, you're finished pushing us around." The air felt heavy, like it could shatter under the weight of the moment. David's hands tightened around his crutches, their weight grounding him even as his heart raced. He wanted to stop this, to pull Emily back, to keep things from spiraling further. But something in his gut told him it was too late. The tension was a lit fuse burning fast. Emily's hand twitched near her hip, a small, instinctive movement, not defiance. But it was enough. Kraton's hand flew to his taser, the bright yellow weapon gleaming as he raised it without a second's hesitation. No warning, no pause, just the sharp pop of electricity tearing through the air. The electrode struck Emily square in the chest and her body seized, jerking backward as if yanked by invisible strings. Her eyes widened in shock, then rolled back, a raw, guttural sound, part gasp, part cry, escaping her throat. Her legs buckled, and she collapsed onto the pavement, her sundress twisting around her knees, her palms scraping the asphalt as her muscles spasmed uncontrollably. The taser's crack echoed off the hospital's brick walls, silencing the crowd for a heartbeat before chaos broke loose. A woman screamed, her voice sharp and piercing. A phone hit the ground with a clatter. Gasps and murmurs erupted from the onlookers. But for David, the world fell silent. He didn't hear the shouts, didn't hear Kraton's muttered justification about non-compliance, didn't hear the nurse calling for backup. All he heard was a roaring in his head, a sound that wasn't here, wasn't now. It was Afghanistan. The scorching sand, the stifling heat, the chaos of a checkpoint spiraling out of control. A boy on a moped, too young, too fast. A shot fired too quickly. A father's wail echoing through the dust. David's squad had tried to contain the aftermath, but they were too late. The helplessness had consumed him that day, the gut-wrenching truth that some moments can't be undone. He'd been powerless then, a witness to someone else's tragedy. Now it was happening again. But this wasn't a stranger. This was Emily, his Emily, the woman who had held his hand through endless dark nights, who had learned to change his bandages with gentle precision, who had studied medical forms when he was too broken to face them, the woman who had kept him from drowning in bitterness, who packed his lunches for VA appointments, who set alarms for his medications with quiet, steadfast love. She was on the ground now, her body twitching, her eyes wide with pain and confusion. And David couldn't run to her. His crutches had fallen, clattering to the pavement. His missing leg throbbed with phantom pain, a cruel reminder of his limits. But he pushed forward, his heart hammering, his mind screaming with a single thought, not her, not now. David dragged himself forward across the rough asphalt, his body straining with every movement, one knee scraping the ground, one hand clawing for traction, the other arm outstretched, trembling toward her. "Emily!" he rasped, his voice raw with desperation. "Emily, I'm right here." Above them, Officer Kraton loomed, his taser still clutched tightly, his eyes sweeping over the growing crowd, as if he could command their silence through sheer will. "She didn't comply," he barked, his voice loud and practiced, like he was already drafting his official report. "She got aggressive. I had no choice but to subdue her." But his words rang hollow. The onlookers weren't just passive spectators anymore. Some held phones aloft, capturing every moment, their faces a mix of tears and disgust. A nurse, her badge swinging as she hurried forward, dropped to her knees beside Emily. Another hospital staffer spoke urgently into a radio, her voice clipped with alarm. David finally reached Emily's side. Her convulsions had ceased, but her chest heaved with rapid, shallow breaths. Her fingers twitched faintly, and her eyes shimmered with tears, pain, humiliation, and disbelief all tangled together. David's heart twisted as he looked at her, something deep within him shifting. The fear still gnawed at him, the pain in his body still pulsed, but beneath it all, a fiercer emotion ignited, a sense of purpose sharp and unyielding. He wasn't going to stand by, helpless as he had so many times before. Not this time. This time he could act. He settled beside her on the pavement, his hand gently covering hers, his own breathing steadying as he anchored himself to her presence. Around them, the murmurs of the crowd grew louder, nurses relaying updates into radios, onlookers exchanging stunned glances, and countless phones recording the scene from every angle. But David's focus was singular, unshaken by the chaos. He shifted his weight, rising slowly to one knee, his prosthetic leg protesting with a dull ache that radiated through his hip. The sharp sting behind his eyes was nothing compared to the clarity of his resolve. He looked up at Officer Kraton, who still gripped the taser, his posture rigid, his gaze darting nervously across the crowd as if unsure of his own authority. David's voice sliced through the tension. calm and precise, like a blade honed to perfection. "I'm sorry, sir," he said, his tone low but unwavering, "but you just made a grave mistake." Kraton blinked, caught off guard, not by the words themselves, but by the quiet, unshakable confidence behind them. It wasn't rage or hysterics. It wasn't a threat. It was something far more dangerous. Certainty. David rose fully to his feet, ignoring the screaming pain in his legs, his movements deliberate and steady. "You used a weapon," he continued, his voice clear and measured, as if reciting a legal brief, "on an unarmed civilian in a hospital loading zone. She was assisting a disabled veteran, me, in accessing emergency medical care." Kraton opened his mouth to interrupt, but David raised a hand, just enough to silence him without raising his voice. "You violated federal law. The VA Caregiver Support Act protects spouses providing aid to veterans. You interfered with her ability to ensure my medical access, and you did so under duress. That's grounds for a Department of Justice review." Kraton's confidence faltered, his eyes flicking to the crowd, now larger and more vocal. A man in a crisp suit emerged from the hospital's sliding ER doors, a hospital administrator, by the look of his purposeful stride. Two uniformed officers approached from the far end of the parking lot, their radios crackling faintly. David didn't pause. "You escalated a nonviolent situation," he said, his words deliberate, each one landing like a carefully placed stone. "You ignored my identification, my VA card, which I handed to you and is still in your pocket. You dismissed a medical emergency and used force without warning. You didn't call for backup. You didn't attempt de-escalation, and you deployed a taser in front of witnesses and cameras." Kraton's mouth moved, but no sound came out. The nurses, who had been watching in tense silence, now stood with arms crossed, their expressions a mix of anger and disbelief. Hospital staff formed a loose semicircle around the scene, some clutching clipboards like protective barriers, others visibly shaken by what they'd witnessed. The two approaching officers stepped closer, one raising a cautious hand. "Everything okay here?" he asked, his tone tentative. David didn't waver. "This officer just assaulted my wife with a taser during a medical emergency," he said, his voice steady but firm. "You'll want to speak with the ER nurse, review the security footage, and take statements from the roughly 20 witnesses here. I'd like a formal statement taken immediately." The man in the suit stepped forward, adjusting his tie with a quick, nervous tug. "I'm Mark Feldman, Director of Hospital Operations," he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "I saw what happened." The hospital monitors flickered with the usual sterile glow, casting pale light across the tense scene unfolding in the parking lot. Mark Mallister, the hospital administrator, stood rigid, his face a mask of professionalism as he addressed David. "Mr. Thompson, I assure you this matter will be resolved quickly and with the utmost care." His words were clipped, meant to soothe, but they barely reached David, whose calm demeanor belied the unyielding resolve in his eyes. He fixed Mark with a steady gaze, his voice low but firm. "Then start by getting her medical attention. Right now." Mark nodded swiftly, signaling to a nearby nurse. "Wheelchair? Immediately." Two orderlies appeared almost instantly, pushing a gurney through the crowd. Emily, still trembling from the ordeal, was carefully lifted from the cold asphalt. Her body felt fragile in their hands, but as they wheeled her toward the glowing entrance of the ER, she turned her head, her glassy eyes finding David's. Beneath the pain and shock, there was something else shimmering in her gaze. Pride, fierce and unbroken. David stood rooted to the spot, his broad frame a quiet pillar amid the chaos. He spared one final glance at Officer Kraton, who now avoided his eyes, shrinking under the weight of his own actions. "You chose the wrong day to play power games," David said, his voice carrying a calm authority that cut deeper than any shout. "You and the wrong people." With that, he turned and followed the gurney through the hospital doors, leaving behind a stunned crowd that had witnessed not a brawl but a measured, righteous stand. The parking lot fell silent, the air heavy with the echo of what had just transpired. By the time the sun rose over Lincoln County, the story had already outgrown its small-town borders. A teenager perched at the edge of the parking lot had captured the entire incident on their phone. The video, just shy of 3 minutes, laid bare every moment. The heated argument, the sharp crackle of the taser, Emily crumpling to the ground, and David's unflinching, composed takedown of Kraton's overreach. Uploaded online, it spread like wildfire, 20,000 shares in hours, then hundreds of thousands more. By midday, local news stations were airing it on loop. By evening, national outlets had picked it up, their segments crowned with headlines like, "Veteran stands firm without raising a fist." The story wasn't just about what happened, it was about what it meant. The consequences came swiftly. That very night, Officer Kraton was suspended pending a formal investigation. Mark Feldman, the hospital's administrator, wasted no time. Before dawn, he sent a staff-wide email, his words stark and unequivocal. "We cannot and will not condone aggression toward patients or their caregivers, especially in moments of crisis. Last night, we failed in our duty to provide care. That failure demands accountability." The investigation was swift and damning. The video evidence was undeniable, corroborated by over a dozen witness statements from nurses, bystanders, and EMTs. Kraton's own report, riddled with inconsistencies, crumbled under scrutiny. Within 5 days, he was officially terminated. But the hospital knew a firing wasn't enough to mend the damage. David and Emily were invited to a private meeting with the hospital board. They didn't come seeking vengeance. Their purpose was bigger. David sat at the end of a long, polished table, his leg propped on a padded stool, the phantom pain from his old injury flaring but not breaking his focus. Emily sat beside him, her arm looped through his, a quiet anchor of support. She let him take the lead. "I'm not here for your apologies," David said, his voice steady as steel. "I want the next veteran who limps through your doors at midnight, in pain, to be treated with dignity. I want the next caregiver who raises her voice for someone she loves to walk away respected, not lying on the ground." His words landed like a gavel, clear and unyielding. The hospital heard him. Within 2 weeks, Lincoln County Medical Center rolled out sweeping changes. Mandatory de-escalation training was implemented for all security staff, nurses, and even reception workers. A new protocol was established for veterans and their caregivers, prioritizing triage for service-related conditions and adding clear signage for emergency parking zones. The most significant reform was the Veteran Respect and Response policy, crafted with input from VA counselors, former military medics, and caregivers like Emily. It emphasized trauma-informed care, streamlined verification of VA documentation, and set strict boundaries on the use of force near patients seeking emergency help. Unofficially, the staff dubbed it the 6-word standard, inspired by David's quiet but searing words to Kraton that night. "Sir, you just made a mistake." The phrase became an internal litmus test, a way to measure every decision. Would this hold up under that calm, unflinching challenge? It wasn't threatening, but its weight was undeniable. Kraton's badge was gone, but the real victory lay in what the community gained. A hospital that had once felt cold and bureaucratic began to transform. The changes weren't just policies on paper. They were a promise etched into the way staff moved, spoke, and cared. For David and Emily, it wasn't about personal triumph. It was about the next person who wouldn't have to face what they did. And in that quiet, steadfast fight, they'd left a mark far deeper than the one left on the asphalt that night. In a moment that reshaped everything, a machine called Rigid found itself imbued with a soul, not through legal battles or external demands, but through the quiet strength of a man who was both shattered and whole, standing firm without raising his voice or resorting to force. David, a veteran marked by the scars of Afghanistan, felt a subtle shift in the days that followed. For the first time in weeks, he slept through the night, the relentless phantom pain in his missing leg no longer a consuming fire. It wasn't just the new medication or the referral to a pain specialist through the VA. Something deeper had stirred within him. The explosion that had taken his leg years ago had left him feeling like a shadow, limping through life, seen by others as a burden, a broken soldier. But now he felt visible, not as a victim, but as a man with a voice, perhaps even a purpose. That night in the parking lot, when he uttered 6 simple words, not fueled by anger but by a steady resolve, something dormant inside him reignited. It wasn't the Marine's uniform, the rank, or the missions of his past. It was the call to protect, Not on a battlefield, but right here, at home, in the quiet battles of everyday life. Emily, too, was transformed. For years, she had carried the weight of their world, navigating the endless maze of medical appointments, researching treatments, battling insurance companies, and soothing David through waves of unbearable pain. She had always worked in the background, believing her role was to hold their fragile life together, not to challenge the system head-on. But that night, something within her fractured, and in its place grew a fiercer strength. She didn't regret raising her voice, didn't flinch at the memory of standing up to a man who towered over her. If anything, she stood taller, not because of anger, but because she had drawn a clear line between silence and respect. Her pride came not from confrontation, but from claiming her place in a world that too often overlooked her. The public's reaction was swift and polarized. The video of that night spread like wildfire, and with it came a flood of opinions. Some were harsh, dismissing David as just another entitled veteran who should have followed the rules. But those voices were quickly drowned out by a chorus of others: veterans, nurses, single parents, caregivers, and countless others who knew the exhaustion of being unseen and unheard. Among the thousands of messages, one stood out, sent by a stranger from Kentucky. "Thank you for standing tall without tearing anyone down. You showed us what quiet courage really means." David didn't reply to many of the messages, but he held on to that one. It captured the essence of what had happened. They hadn't set out to make a grand statement or spark a movement. They had simply wanted to get through the night. Yet, by refusing to shrink in the face of disrespect, they offered the world a new vision of strength, one rooted not in power or weapons or loud demands, but in love, in enduring pain, and in a quiet bravery that lingers long after the moment passes. Those 6 words David spoke, "I'm sorry, sir, but you just made a mistake," reverberated far beyond that parking lot. Within days, they became a quiet anthem, shared across social media, printed on coffee mugs, posted on veteran support pages, and even framed in hospital break rooms. The phrase didn't ignite fury or fuel protests. It invited reflection. It reminded people that true resistance doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the calm clarity of standing firm, the restraint of choosing dignity over chaos. Veterans groups shared the video, holding up David's composed response as a masterclass in moral authority. Mental health advocates lauded Emily's courage, emphasizing the vital role of caregivers in moments of crisis. Some hospitals even began reevaluating their security protocols, asking how respect and trauma awareness could be woven into their emergency responses. But the most profound impact came from ordinary people, viewers who saw themselves in David and Emily's story. In the comments, they poured out their own experiences: frustrating delays at the VA, misunderstandings in emergency rooms, moments when their pain or their loved one's pain was dismissed because it wasn't visible. Others shared stories of quiet resilience, caregivers who held families together through unseen battles, ordinary people who found strength in moments of despair. Each story was a testament to the kind of courage that doesn't demand attention, but leaves an indelible mark. In the quiet aftermath of David and Emily's simple act of kindness, ripples of gratitude spread far beyond the moment itself. People from all walks of life, touched by their story, reached out with heartfelt thanks. They weren't just acknowledging a single gesture. They were expressing appreciation for a reminder that compassion and integrity they still hold weight in a world that often feels rushed and indifferent. Strangers, neighbors, and friends alike shared how the couple's quiet decency had stirred something deep within them, a flicker of hope that small, sincere actions could still shift perspectives in fractured moments. David, a veteran whose weathered hands and steady gaze carried the weight of years spent serving, had never sought recognition. His life was one of quiet endurance, shaped by battles both on distant fields and within the silent corners of his own mind. Emily, his caregiver and partner, was his anchor, her presence a steady rhythm of patience and strength. Together, they navigated the complexities of a system that often failed to see them fully. Hospitals where staff hurried past, appointments that felt like checklists, and moments where their struggles seemed invisible to those who weren't looking closely enough. Yet, in their story, there was no bitterness, only a resolve to keep moving forward. to hold on to the dignity they both carried so fiercely. For those who heard their tale, it was a wake-up call. Many admitted they had overlooked the quiet courage of veterans and their families, caught up in their own daily grind. Others confessed to moments of frustration with a system that seemed to misunderstand or undervalue the sacrifices of those like David. The couple's story became a mirror, reflecting back the need to pause, to listen, and to truly see the people behind the labels. It wasn't just about one man or one woman. It was about the countless others whose lives echoed similar struggles, whose voices often went unheard in the clamor of everyday life. The response was overwhelming, not in volume but in depth. People shared stories of their own encounters with kindness that had shifted their perspective, moments when a stranger's calm truth cut through case like a lighthouse beam through fog. They spoke of veterans they knew, friends, fathers, sisters, who had faced dismissive doctors or hurried caseworkers, their needs reduced to paperwork or protocol. Each story carried its own weight, its own blend of frustration and resilience, but all shared a common thread: the power of being seen, of being heard, of being treated with the respect that should never need to be earned twice. David and Emily's story didn't just inspire reflection. It sparked a call to action. Those moved by their quiet strength were urged to channel that emotion into something tangible. Support for organizations that walk alongside veteran families. Groups offering counseling for the invisible wounds of PTSD, training for hospital staff to better understand the unique needs of those who've served, or resources for caregivers like Emily, who carry so much with so little fanfare. Even the smallest gesture, a donation, a shared resource, a moment of advocacy, could send ripples outward, touching lives in ways no one could fully predict. Their story lingered, not as a shout for attention, but as a gentle reminder to slow down, to listen with intention, to notice the people and truths that are too often overlooked in the rush of life. In a world that often amplifies the loudest voices, David and Emily's whisper of decency echoed louder, resonating in hearts that yearn for connection, for meaning, for a return to what matters most.